Right. Welcome back to the Empowering Minds Mental Health Podcast. And today I'm joined by Sarah Merritt. And today Sarah's going to share her lived experience with psychosis and recovery and how she uses her voice today to support others navigating serious mental health challenges. And so, again, Sarah, I want to thank you and welcome you for coming here today. And so, just to get us started, can you start by telling us a little bit about your story?
Well, thank you. Yes, Jennifer, thanks for having me here. So my story of mental illness started when I was overprescribed Adderall in college and had a substance-induced psychosis. Once that happened to me, I was not the same, where I went on an antipsychotic indefinitely. So for about a decade, I wasn't really myself. I was struggling professionally and socially, and I knew there was something wrong, but I couldn't figure out what it was. And in ways, I internalized it as, wow, something's wrong with me. And I did go off my antipsychotic after a decade because I didn't have any overt psychotic symptoms. And I wasn't sure it was the antipsychotic that I needed. I had been in therapy and counseling but I made the fateful decision to go off my psychotic break when I was in a master's degree. And the last week of classes, I had my first full-blown psychotic break, which was devastating. Um, and I even started a PhD program 2 months after my hospitalization, which was probably a bad idea, but I survived. I made it. I did well. And I had come to a full year of, like after a year, I made a full cognitive recovery, but I was doing so well that the psychiatrist at the time took me off my antipsychotic. And so then I left school and had my next full-blown psychotic break a month or two after I left.
Mhm.
I was then discharged too early from the inpatient unit because my insurance ran out, and I chose to be homeless briefly before I was taken in by a Good Samaritan. But then I went off my medication again. I had another full-blown psychotic break. And that's when I was broken. And I was like, you know what? I've learned the hard way that I'm stable when on antipsychotics and I have a break when I'm not on them. And I've been on antipsychotics ever since. And over the past 14 years, I've made a slow and gradual full recovery, both cognitively and emotionally.
So, your story is a story of resilience. So, again, thank you for sharing that. And so, from from your experience, what does emotional recovery from psychosis? What does that look like?
So I have my own definition of emotional recovery from psychosis, and I recently published an academic piece in Schizophrenia Bulletin Open, a first-person perspective piece about what emotional recovery it is and how it leads to the optimum health outcome and leads to full quality of life. There's a cognitive recovery, which is defined by stability and recovering cognitively over time. So you have less cognitive impairment. But emotional recovery, I believe, is a second form of recovery that is more gradual and elusive and takes longer. To me, the most simplified version of emotional recovery is trusting and believing in yourself and wanting to be you. And that may sound like a simple definition, but it's loaded. Trusting and believing in yourself affords the motivate, it builds motivation and confidence in yourself to persist and have patience. It helps develop a long-term perspective on your life where you're not just completely overcome with short-term emotions and fears and humiliation over what just happened. Um, it's particularly important in early recovery because in early recovery, you're faced sometimes with the greatest challenges of your entire life when you're least equipped to deal with them. Like, do I have a roof over my head? Am I homeless? Am I disabled now?
Mhm.
Will I ever recover? Will I have another psychotic break? Uh, do people look at me differently? Have I damaged my reputation and hurt relationships? And
Mhm.
ultimately, I'll be honest, another question is this a life worth living? I don't know if this is the life I signed up for. So these can, and some people face legal troubles after all this happened. And so, you know, being homeless was something I never thought was in the cards for me, but I was briefly, and there's also hospital bills. So yes, there's all this collateral damage that impacts emotional recovery too. Um,
Yeah. I I like how you highlighted that part, trusting and believing in yourself and how that leads to building motivation. And again, like I was sharing with you earlier before we started recording, everybody has a story or a journey. And this is something that I struggled with, trusting and believing in myself. But over the last about 2 years or so, I've been grasping that concept and I've learned so many positive things about myself that it was just buried somewhere within me. But I do like how you highlighted that. So that's a good point to be at when you are trusting and believing in yourself. That's a good path to be on. And so with emotional recovery, why do you feel emotional recovery is such an important part of early recovery after psychosis?
So, in early recovery, I can't speak for everyone out there, but I've been lead facilitator of a NAMI support group, National Alliance on Mental Illness.
Mm-hmm.
I was lead facilitator for almost 4 years. And so, a lot of my emotions I experienced is echoed through peers that I've known for years. And so many people, I think the emotional aspect hits when you come home from the hospital and uh, you weren't yourself. Well, you were yourself. You were always you, but you weren't acting like yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Part of what's so painful about psychotic breaks is you have anosognosia, you have no filter on what you do and say that you normally would. So you do feel like you misrepresent yourself to others. There is this idea of humiliation. And you can lose relationships. I know people who have lost custody of their children, lost spouses, lost careers. These are all devastating things. But I think it's the stigma of our illness that makes it 10 times worse.
Mm-hmm.
It's not considered an objective medical illness. Like with an objective medical illness, it says nothing about you as a person or what other people think of you. But in this illness, part of what makes it so terrible, including my diagnosis of schizophrenia, is this idea that it changes who you are as a person and how other people look at you, and if how many future opportunities you have in life. Will it change the rest of your life? How other people look at you.
Mm-hmm. One of my keywords on this podcast is stigma, and you just said that. And so I'm very glad that you did mention that word because that's what this podcast is about, is providing education around because there's so many stigmas out there. So I'm glad that you are answering these questions like very direct. And so I really appreciate your transparency about your own journey. I think people are more receptive when you've actually kind of been through a journey and maybe they might be on the same journey and they have someone who's already been through it. They just seem to it, it resonates a little bit better when you have
Right.
shared lived experience. So thank you for your transparency. And you also mentioned NAMI. That's probably one of my favorite resources to push. I push my local affiliate. And so NAMI, again, National Alliance on Mental Illness, y'all, that's a good resource for those of you who will be watching later on. So we're going to continue to talk about emotional recovery. So how can focusing on emotional recovery early help reduce the chances of relapse or support long-term stability?
So I believe that emotional recovery is critical in doing the hard work it takes to recover. And part of emotional recovery is having self-love, building that compassion for yourself, and making decisions on what's best for you versus
Mhm.
what other people might think. And that boils down to medication adherence. While medicine is not for everyone, and I'm not giving medical advice, antipsychotics do make a difference for a significant number of people, but it's
Mhm.
hard to stay on them based on stigma and your fear of what other people might think or what it means about you if you take an antipsychotic. And this stigma on antipsychotics is the same stigma there is for inpatient hospitalization, for our diagnosis, for our illness. So even the medicine itself is considered more subjective, not an objective medication. And I see this when I present on the cultural myths that we live by when it comes to antipsychotics according to stigma. I get questions like, are antipsychotics approved by the FDA? Are antipsychotics covered by insurance? Of course
Mhm.
they are. They're a legit medical, um, it's real medicine, just like anything else. But I think there's a lot of information out there that calls into question if it's real medicine, is it real science? But I think emotional recovery helps you navigate that stigma. And sometimes when you're in the beginning of it, and I lived it myself, I went off my antipsychotic twice on my own, which led to two major psychotic breaks. So I fell for these things just like anyone else. But I feel like emotional recovery um, allows you to stop being a slave to what others might think, where you make choices to live your best life because you only live one life. So
Mhm.
you might as well be happy and do the work it takes uh,
That's-
to live your best life.
mhm. Yeah, something you just said. Do the work. I always stress to people about the word recovery because there's a stigma around recovery. People think, oh, well, such and such, they're in recovery, it's over. No, it is a lifelong thing so that you can stay in a recovered state. So it's just using like different coping skills. And again, I'm not promoting medication either, but for those who have to take medication, sometimes that's just part of their life journey, and that's part of them just keeping healthy. So thank you for giving us some more information here on recovery. Now, I wanted to ask you, for someone who may be in the early stages of recovery, what are some things that can help support emotional healing during that time?
So I wish I had known about NAMI's support groups when I was in early recovery. I just thought NAMI was this high-level advocacy group. I didn't know they actually had services for people like me, and
Mm-hmm.
I wish I'd known about that sooner. But I still benefit from the NAMI support group, even in full recovery.
Mm-hmm.
I will be on antipsychotics for life. That's a choice that I've made. I made
Mm-hmm.
a full recovery while on medicine. And to your point of recovery, I don't think there's ever a point of arrival for anybody where, oh, all of a sudden I have everything figured out and life is going to be easy from now on. I am still a work in progress. I'm still working on things.
Mm-hmm.
So there's never a point where everything's just perfect and easy. But I can say that I've made progress through weekly therapy for decades and staying on medicine.
Mm-hmm. Again, your answers are so transparent because
Well, and I will say to answer your question about what's important early recovery, like
mhm,
I said, support groups.
yeah,
To me, it was invaluable that my family always believed I could get better.
mhm,
Because it's easy to just want to fold or give up because
yeah,
like it just everything is just so overwhelming. The illness itself, the collateral damage, the stigma, it's crushing.
mhm,
So yeah, recovering in a judgment-free zone, where the people and friends that never give up on you, like
Mm-hmm.
friends that stay by your side and don't see you as any different than before your illness. That means everything. And I also find that EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing, therapy has really helped because a lot of my emotional recovery has to do with the processings of traumas, many of which could have contributed to my illness. So sometimes part of recovery is treating the underlying traumas that could have triggered your illness. So there's a lot of different factors that help with early recovery. And
Mm-hmm.
so much of it is is hope and this persistence. And the reason that I started blogging in the first place, I started blogging with NAMI, led to the Psychology Today blog, and now I also blog for Teva Pharmaceuticals. But my why has never changed. I write what I wish I could have read in early recovery when I was the only person in the world I knew with schizophrenia. I felt helpless. I felt humiliated, ashamed, isolated, and alone. I have something I call the five S's, which is suffering and silent shame and secrecy due to stigma. It took almost 10 years to meet one other person with a diagnosis even close to mine. But that meant everything because in early recovery, it's easy to feel like you're this human mystery the world has never seen before, just some kind of bizarre enigma. So you know in your head that there's other people diagnosed with schizophrenia, but until you meet somebody else with your illness,
Mm-hmm.
you're that one person in the world who's not normal. But all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden, it normalizes you, and you don't feel so alone or like no one could possibly understand what you're going through once you meet somebody else. And that took place when I joined a NAMI support group.
Yeah, no, they do have great support groups. I met someone very recently, and I referred them to. They have a stress and anxiety group. I mean, it was online, virtual, and so they've made some great connection there. But yeah, NAMI does have great support groups. And something you said, you mentioned about therapy, and so I have people to say to me quite often, "I can't believe you have a therapist because you work in mental health, right?" Yeah, there, there's stigmas around. It's like it's frowned upon in certain communities. It's kind of frowned upon if you mention that you go to therapy. I just tell people, yeah. When I first started out, I was going every week. But through those sessions, I learned coping skills. I learned to be resilient. I just learned different things. I call it my wellness box. Take it with me everywhere I go. So then it dropped down to, I think I was doing like once every 2 weeks. Then I got to the point where it was once a month. I am still in therapy, so that is a part of coping. That's what helps me, and so I always encourage people. There's so many resources, like you said. There's NAMI, SAMHSA. You have peer support, uh, life coaches. Of course, your therapist and your psychiatrist, behavioral health teams. It's always a good thing to tap into those resources to help you instead of, like you said, living your life in like secrecy or shame because of stigmas around mental health. So again, thank you for your transparency. And so, speaking of support, so what role do family members or support systems play when it comes to emotional recovery as well?
Well, I think first of all, part of helping with emotional recovery is understanding what emotional recovery is, but
Mm-hmm.
also understanding the viewpoint of your loved one who's going through this.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I do present sometimes to a caregiving group called Welcoming Wellness. They do presentations specifically geared towards caregivers. So sometimes it helps to understand the state of mind of your loved one. What
Mm-hmm.
emotions or thoughts could be going through their head? What could their reasons be for not wanting to be on antipsychotics?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think first and foremost, like I've already said, the fact that I had friends who did not give up on me and did not turn their back on me And I had parents who did not judge my label of schizophrenia, even when I was devastated when I was diagnosed with that, and who never gave up on me.
Mm-hmm.
Always thought that I could get better. Um, that's the most invaluable thing. And also, I will say that sometimes saying less is more. You're
Mm-hmm.
not going to, with mental illness, you can't magically come up with something that's just going to make everything better and make someone feel better. Sometimes it's how you say things that really matter. When
Mm-hmm.
you say something, is there any judgment in you? Is there any judgment in your look, your expression, or do you look at them just like you would have before their illness? I remember a neighbor of my mother's when I was living with my parents when I came home from the hospital in that third psychotic break, which I had 3 breaks in 2 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this woman came over with a bouquet of flowers from the grocery store, just a simple $10 bouquet in the checkout line.
Mm-hmm.
And that is one of the most profound things that anybody ever did to me in my mental health journey. Because let me tell you, people hospitalized in the psych ward usually do not get flowers. And for any mental health professional or peer I've heard of, no one's ever heard of anybody getting flowers coming home from the hospital. And to me, I don't even know if she said anything like, except for handing me the flowers. But, on her face, I could tell she wasn't afraid of me. She didn't
Mm-hmm.
judge me. Like the fact that I went to the hospital and got flowers meant I was a normal person. It was an acknowledgement that I just went through something scary and hard at the hospital like anyone else, and I deserved flowers just
Mm-hmm.
like anybody else. So even gestures like that are so incredibly powerful.
That is true. Okay. So we're at the end here. If someone listening today is navigating recovery from psychosis, what message of hope would you want them to hear?
Well, what I try to do with my writing is show that there is a long-term outlook. There
Mm-hmm.
is hope. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes creating that long-term perspective, gives you the patience. Like I had a counselor in my 20s who said, Sarah, you just have to wait for one good thing to happen to you, and then more good things will happen. And she was right, even though that's simple. Part of it is just having the patience, even if things look hopeless, even if things look like my life, like I thought my life was destroyed. I thought my life was hopeless. I thought my whole life was just an embarrassment and a failure. I was really beating myself up. But
Mm-hmm.
I will say that positivity is the ultimate defiance. I would
Yes.
go on to getting married at age 38, having a baby at 40, where I did rebuild my career, all when none of that was really in the cards for me or anybody thought that'd be possible. You can never dismiss your odds of recovery. And as bizarre as you think your experiences may be, tens of millions of people have experienced the same bizarre things. You are normal.
Mm-hmm.
One of my favorite quotes someone in my support group relayed to us was, "Normal is just a setting on a washing machine." We're not so different, and our illness is not the worst thing that can happen to you. It's just the most stigmatized thing. So what I would tell you is you never know what's around the corner. You can't write off life or know what the rest of it holds for you.
Mm-hmm.
And you always have to have kindness and compassion for you, regardless of stigma, and just keep holding on, keep doing the work, keep having patience, going to therapy and doing whatever type of method that works for you. And uh, I like my blog on Psychology Today talks about specific emotional recovery topics like connecting socially after psychosis, professional life after psychosis, cognitive impairment after psychosis, embarrassment after psychosis, self-love. So a lot of different topics. It's called Healing Mind on Psychology Today. My name is Sarah Merritt Ryan. You can search it on Google. And I think that I target all of these blog posts. I also write on stigma and how stigma influences things. But I specifically write these blogs for early recovery, people going in early recovery, because I want other people to have a better emotional experience of this illness than I did.
Thank you so much. So again, I really thank you. This was a good interview. I thank you for coming on, sharing your journey. That really takes a lot to be able to speak freely to help someone else. And so I really thank you for coming on and sharing your story with us. And also, I'm very strategic in the podcast and empowering minds. That includes inspiring other people, encouraging other people, talking around stigmas around mental health and educating people. So you've helped me do that today. But there was one thing I want you to have time to highlight anything that you would like to share, any type of contact information where people may want to reach out to you for different reasons, your publications that you've done, anything that you want to leave, you're more than welcome to do so.
Well, thank you. Yes, you might see my cat's tail in the background now. She's walking around my computer. See, you saw the tail again. Uh, so yes, I have a website, sarahmerrittryan.com. It has links to almost all my publications. It has a place to join the wait list for what will be my memoir. And I have a book of sonnets coming out soon this summer called My Soul to Keep, Faith in the Midst of Suffering Leads to Deliverance and Praise. They are sonnets from a faith perspective, just on suffering in general. That's the one piece of writing I write that has more to do with faith and suffering in general versus mental illness. I'm really proud of the Psychology Today blog I've had for 3 years. It's developed a following that I'm proud of. I have that blog on Teva Pharmaceuticals. I also have a piece that I mentioned that I wrote in Schizophrenia Bulletin Open. That's available online, and the link is available on my site. I also have a couple pieces published in Writer's Digest that I'm really proud of. It's kind of a mecca for writers, and I'm starting to present on writing itself too. And I'm a speaker. So if you'd ever like to book me for speaking, you can always contact me on my website. I also have a free guide on my website called Emotional Recovery Essentials that you can download. And that is a 12-page breakdown where I go in much more detail on how I define emotional recovery.
So we'll stay in contact because when your book is published, I want to buy it because I'm pretty sure that's going to be a good read. So we'll stay in contact.
Absolutely. That means everything. I appreciate it. We have a lot in common. So, any way we stay in contact is great.
Great. Okay, so again, thank you for coming on, and I'll be in contact with you a little bit later on today.
Okay. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you. Take care. Nice meeting you.
All right. Bye.